Hello, welcome again to FAIRtax Power Radio. I'm Bob Paxton.
And I'm Bob Scarborough.
And we are
the
FAIRtax Guys. Scrolling Banner and Fat Albert here.
Is that what you've named that? I think I heard you say that the other day.
Oh, yes. This is my 11 by 11, and I call it Fat Albert. And it takes me about an hour and a half to solve it. If it's all scrambled up, really, totally scrambled, this is fairly easy to get back.
Do you get to take a nap in the middle of the solving of the 90 minutes there?
Not usually, but I have been known to take this on an airplane, and it makes the flight go a lot faster.
Oh, I'll bet so. Oh, that's funny. Yeah, buddy.
How's it up in North Carolina? It is broiling down here in Florida already.
Well, the weekend that we're recording this, the week before, that it was hot, 102 heat index, wow. 95, 96, a little bit of a breeze, sometimes some rain. Now this weekend coming up, which will be a couple of weeks prior when this show actually airs, the temperature went from 95 on Friday to about 85, 86 on Saturday. And then on Sunday, which was Father's Day, it was to 82 predicted. And of course, we'll know exactly what it was by the time this show actually airs. But that's what we're looking forward to, a 10-degree drop for a few days. And then
send some of it down here, but we could all right. Let's get going on. If you missed last week's FAIRtax Power Radio, very interesting discussion with Steve Hayes about how the FAIRtax would help greatly the supply chain problems that we're all running up against.
And talking about the payroll tax, the income tax being a hindrance to innovation and commerce because of what it did to getting products here in the United States, because
it drove American manufacturing overseas, and now we're at the mercy of the overseas countries to get not just the products but the components that go into those products. They're manufactured elsewhere, and you can see it's just causing us a big mutt mess. Won't go through that all again this time. Just go back next week. Check out last week's show. Check that out. But what we will go forward with this time, a full-fledged Congress.gov segment. Last week with Steve, I had to mention the one that has found its way into the tax proposal Hall of Shame, the proposal to add a 1,000% excise tax on high-capacity magazines and assault weapons. We won't revisit that. You can go back and check that out again, other than to say that one's in the Hall of Shame, and we will be talking about that one a bit later on in the year. But for this one, here, try this one. This is H.R. 8116. to amend the Internal Revenue Code of 1986 to repeal the excise tax on heavy trucks and trailers and for other purposes. So isn't that funny how the tax code said, well, when times are good, man, those big heavy trucks, they're tearing up our roads. We need to tax the fire out of them. And then, oh, wait a minute, we can't get the things that they bring us. Let's be nice to them for a while. We'll repeal this tax that we put on them back then. And that is just, I call that just the shifting sand nature of the tax code. And one of the really big reasons we need to pull that out by the roots and replace it with a fair tax.
Absolutely. Oh, my goodness. And it never ceases to amaze me. And I've always had this feeling that the representatives use the tax code to curry favor with special interests, lobbyists, et cetera, that basically helps them build their reelection campaign coffers. Mm-hmm. And is really, I mean, even if it doesn't make it, at least, hey, we tried. But it's just, it's insane to be using the tax code to effectively encourage us to act in a certain way, to buy a certain product, to not do a certain thing. Or it's what you read every week is reality for the process there in DC with regard to introducing bills.
Well, let's plug something we got at least on the drawing board here at FAIRtax Power Radio. You're trying to arrange an interview with your representative, Virginia Fox, for some insight on how all this process works, right?
Right. And I you hope that somebody would be able to tell you those things and just be frank about it. And it may end up being that it's going to be somebody that's not running anymore, that's out of Congress, because who knows, when you get up there in Washington, things change in a person's mind as far as what they can reveal. It's why we don't hear too much. There's some, but too much about the differences between income tax and a tax on consumption, or using the phrase, the terms that we always use is, the fair tax, and people interchange it with the flat tax, which of course it's, two different things altogether. So yes, I hope that our representative here in North Carolina, in our neck of the woods, is going to be able to shine maybe a little bit of insight into how this particular part of the tax process works, a tax code being used to introduce legislation.
All right, well, let me run this one by you. HR 8020 8020, to amend the Internal Revenue Code to allow a deduction for investment advisory expenses of certain funeral and cemetery trusts during the suspension of miscellaneous itemized deductions and for other purposes.
How would you miss something and you would need to put that in this particular piece of legislation, this particular tax code amendment?
All right, we're not doing miscellaneous itemized deductions for a while, but we're going to go ahead and introduce this other deduction now for the investment advisory expenses of certain funeral and cemetery trusts. I guess that industry has a pretty strong lobbying presence up there.
It does. But, they go up there with shovels and backhoes, and yeah, absolutely.
All right, I got another one here for you. This is HR 7990. It's called the Healthy Homes Act. Now, this one actually has some text in it. So let me get on here, open this up. And the Healthy Homes Act, HR 7990, is a bill to amend the Internal Revenue Code of 1986 to temporarily expand the low-income housing tax credit for healthcare-oriented housing. Got that? They want to expand the low-income housing tax credit for healthcare-oriented housing. Okay,
is that like a senior citizen center, housing center?
Well, it's actually, it's interesting. If you dig into the bill here, I had it here somewhere. 2, 3,
healthcare.
4, there it is. There it is. For the purposes of this subsection, the term healthcare-oriented housing means any qualified low-income building which meets at least 3 of the following additional requirements, and it lists 5 of them. And it does talk about what they're truly talking about is museums, library. No, that's a different one. This is a healthcare-oriented housing. I'm ahead of myself here. If you got social determinants of health screenings, if the developer partners with a hospital, health center, other healthcare institution to conduct social determinants of health screenings on the building premises for each new resident as they move in and annually thereafter. That's 1. 2 is if your building contains sufficient physical space for proper equipment for physicians and other appropriate licensed healthcare providers to hold regular health screenings on site for residents. 3, the building contains broadband infrastructure and physical hardware sufficient to ensure that video conferencing capabilities for telehealth interactions will be available, and that the developer has partnered with healthcare providers to participate in the provision of telehealth services and outreach. Or the building has classroom space to conduct community health and nutrition workshops and a demonstration kitchen to facilitate healthy cooking demonstrations for residents, and the community and the developer has partnered with a hospital, health center, or other healthcare institution to provide such workshops and demonstrations. Or a medical assistant or trained healthcare worker who connects residents to both healthcare and community services is located in the building on at least a part-time basis. That's 5 different things. If your building has at least 3 of those, that is considered healthcare-oriented housing, and you will get the low-income housing tax credit for just such places like that. I hope you understood all that, because I ain't going to read it again.
It wore me out, especially when you said, here are the details. And then it was just like, man, I feel like I ran a marathon listening to that. Right.
And that's in the tax code.
Yes.
Or it's proposed to be put in the tax code.
Well, and that's the whole thing is why are we using the tax code? Obviously to underscore some perceived needs by the representative that actually added it in there. I'm concerned that there's all of these layers upon layers, and what you just read just now, those 5 items, somebody actually wrote that, actually sat down and put all that and thought about that and put it all together. Unbelievable.
All right, one more here. This is the one I was thinking about earlier when I kind of got ahead of myself. HR 7949, the Stay Cool Act.
Yeah.
The Stay Cool Act. This is to improve response to and preparation for heat waves and extreme heat and for other purposes. And we're talking about a cooling center. If you keep going down here, where's it at? There it is. The internal section 3111 of the Internal Revenue Code is amended by adding at the end the following new section: credit for cooling centers. Cooling centers. This is what I was thinking: museums and libraries and public buildings like that would stay open longer than normal to provide refuge for people from the heat in a big heat wave. So if you do that and you make yourself available as a cooling center, then you'll get this tax credit if this goes through. How cool is that? That
is cool, man. Cool.
All right. Well,
especially right now when it's as hot as it is.
Okay. Well, we will wrap up our Congress.gov segment here on FAIRtax Power Radio. Now we've got, let's see, where's my timer? There it is. We got about 16 minutes left, about half the show. You came up with several little articles again, as you have been doing quite well in the past, that we want to discuss. So I will just toss it over to you and tell you to pick one and run with it.
Well, we are alive today, and we're born with the income tax as something that we have lived with all of our lives. There was never a time in our life where there was no income tax.
Yeah, it was first implemented in 1913.
Studies in college and high school, you'll remember, the reason the American Revolution was put into place and brought about was because the colonial protest against British taxation policy in the 1760s. The interesting thing that I found, and this whole process has brought me back to an understanding of the different ways that the independent nation, as it was called back in the days, when the United States collected taxes on imports, like a tariff.
Excise taxes and tariffs is how the government was funded from, late 1779, 1780, about when the Constitution took effect, and the income tax came about over 100 years later, 1913. So we survived quite nicely as a country, thank you, for well over 100 years with no income tax.
Now, the interesting thing was that they were taxing imports, things that came into the country. They taxed whiskey. And for a while, they taxed glass windows because that was probably something that was new and different. Well, there was probably glass a long time ago, but to tax glass, this is the United States taxing this.
You and I have glass windows right here.
Yeah, I got them too. Everybody has them now, and it makes us see better. And it doesn't make us look better necessarily, but we can see better. States and localities collected what they called poll taxes, which was a tax. You got a tax. It was $5. They tax me as $5. They tax everybody. It's either voters or land or commercial buildings, et cetera. That's states and localities. And then there were federal and state excise taxes. Of course, the excise tax is something that could be taxed on certain items. It could be telecommunications, gasoline, alcohol, tobacco products, and it could be taxed. Yeah, right. Multiple times. So all of these things happen prior to, and you said 1913, it's the 16th Amendment was ratified then. And that was when the United States Constitution defines the direct tax. Article 1, Section 9 defines the direct tax. The 16th Amendment to the Constitution did not create a new tax necessarily. So you go from colonial taxation to the different acts, to the Boston Tea Party, to the tariffs, and then Congress began to get in the mix of how and why and what the amount that was going to be taxed. For instance, in 1921, the Congress decided that we're going to protect local agriculture as opposed to the industry by passing an emergency tariff, which was enacted under President Woodrow Wilson. Republican leaders in the United States rushed to create a temporary measure to ease the plight of farmers at that particular time until something better came along. Rates were increased on wheat, sugar, meat, wool, other agricultural products brought into the United States from foreign nations, which protected domestic producers of those items. So this all, you can sort of see how the snowball of income tax started getting bigger and bigger as it rolled downhill. So that 16th Amendment, which was ratified in about 1913, Congress shall have the power to lay and collect taxes on incomes from whatever source derived, without apportionment among the several states and without regard to any census or enumeration. That's how it, word for word. Yeah. The Supreme Court decision brought about that particular ratification of the 16th Amendment.
Yeah. And you remember they sold the original income tax as, oh no, this is just going to be a very small tax and we're only going to apply it to the 1%, the richest Americans. So trust us, give us the ability to do this and we won't hurt you with it. And within less than a generation, from 1913 to World War II, that was like 30 years.
Right.
The size and scope of the income tax changed dramatically from what they sold it as to the beginnings of the monstrosity that it has morphed into today.
Oh, yeah. And to look at the federal, state, and local income taxes as a percentage of gross domestic product, beginning back in 1916 or so, 17, it was a blip on the radar. And then along about the war, 1941 or so, it went up to right at 15% of GDP. And this is all income, federal, state, payroll, just an amazing amount of revenue was collected. Of course, to fund the war between the states, the Union, Abraham Lincoln put an income tax on folks. It was taken out soon after and deemed unconstitutional. I believe it was in 1894, thereabouts.
1894, when they said no more. So okay, we'll just put in the 16th Amendment. And the funny thing is, people that were pushing that didn't really want an income tax, they said, okay, we'll go along with it if you can get this constitutional amendment passed, thinking that would never happen.
Right.
One of the biggest political mistakes in the United States history was saying, okay, we'll go along with it if you can get that, and they got it.
That's right. And during the war, Congress raised the tax rates. After the war, this is World War I, Congress reduced income tax rates and finally abandoned the income tax. This was the Civil War. Income tax altogether in 1872. The federal government at that time depended again on regressive tariff duties. So several attempts were made. By the time he got to the income tax amendment and in 1913 and the 16th Amendment, we know that they figured out a way. And even now, I think Congress takes advantage of our not understanding, thinking that, income tax is it. That's what we've been doing. That's what we remember. You talk about the best for the American people, and I think when we talked with Steve Hayes last week, we went over the fact that there are a lot of challenges in making sure that as an elected representative that you sort of kind of keep things going in your favor as opposed to what it's going to be doing for us and what the benefit is to us. So as we go along, we want to encourage people to consider a tax on consumption replacing the income tax. Not much will change except for supercharging the economy in terms of income to the federal coffers. The dollar amount will be the same, and they will probably end up finding out they'll get more money at the U.S. Treasury because of a switch to the fair tax, the consumption tax.
All right. Well, you got about 7 minutes left. Where do you want to go now?
Well, History Channel, the History Channel, history.gov had several years ago had an article that I thought was fairly concise. They're talking about why we pay taxes. So this was written back in
because you go to jail if you don't.
Yeah, because you go right. You'll be why we pay taxes. Not and that's the end of the article. Because you go to jail if you don't. Thank you. Good night, and thanks for joining us. No, Sarah Pruitt wrote this article. We'll give her writing credit for this. Since 1950, individual income taxes have been the primary source of revenue for the federal government, together with payroll taxes, which are used to fund social programs like Social Security and Medicare. Income taxes amount to roughly 80% of all federal revenue and are the essential fuel on which our government runs. And then they go through the history, talking about the Civil War, and Supreme Court ruled the tax unconstitutional in 1894, 95. And then, of course, the 16th Amendment was passed by Congress in 1909. By law, any American whose gross income is over $10,000 or $25,000 for married couples filing jointly, or who earned more than $400 from self-employment must file a federal income tax return. There are a number of other circumstances that might require you to file, including selling your home or owing taxes on money you withdrew from your retirement account. In Puerto Rico, for example, it's a U.S. territory. Residents aren't required to pay federal income tax if their income is only from sources within Puerto Rico, but they do pay Social Security, Medicare, import, export, and commodity taxes for a total tax bill of more than $3 billion per year, according to the New York Times. And this article dated back in August of 2018.
Mm-hmm. Well, how about we pull all that out by the roots and put the fair tax in?
Well, and I think that's where people are going. And I know there's a frustration now in the in the country with inflation, and cost of fuel right now is pretty high. And we talk about policy, we talk about world events that could bring about the high prices that we're seeing right now. We learned a lot from Steve Hayes last week, about how interconnected the process of manufacturing is now. It's like for automobiles, with parts coming from overseas that have to go into cars that are put together here, but we're waiting on computer chips, or we're waiting on a particular part to go in the car or into whatever product we're talking about getting. And that's putting a lot of issues in front of getting those items to market that we have taken for granted that we could get. I guess it shows just how fragile that whole supply chain is in terms of getting things where we want them. We go to the grocery store, or we go to the car lot, wherever we go to get on an airplane, all of that's there. Everything is there, and it's instant. And now all of a sudden we're having to wait 6 months for a vehicle, or we can't get the product off the shelf that we want right away, or it costs a lot more money than it did. So the fair tax upends a considerable amount of stress on us in terms of how we pay the tax. We go to the cash register when we buy an item or secure services from someone, new items, clothing, cars, a house, etc. I wonder what people would say if today we had a tax on income, what our economy would look like, even with all of the changes in world affairs going on would be. Wonder if it would be different. Wonder if we would have a different outlook on what's going on in our country today.
You're reminding me of a show that we did with Ron Malero a while back ago let's assume that the fair tax is the law of the land, and you're going to try to convince me that an income tax is better.
Right.
That isn't going to go cool. We're rapidly running out of time here on this FAIRtax Power Radio episode. Again, I do want to mention something, a little promo for next week that we're going to have here. We have got, this is an issue that really doesn't come up a great deal among FAIRtax volunteers, but it is really important to the people that it affects. And we're talking about American citizens living abroad that are subject both to the tax system of the country that they're residing in, and if they have retained their American citizenship, even if they're not living here and they're not making money here, what they make over there is still subject to American taxation. And we're going to have someone on with us next week to discuss that in a bit more detail. In other words, how the American tax system screws over American citizens who don't live within the borders of the United States.
They reach out into whatever country they're in and maintain a hand on their wallet, even from across the oceans.
Yep, that's what they're going to try. So we're going to have someone on with us next week to discuss that particular issue. And I understand this isn't 100% written down yet, but we're working on another radio station. Is that did I hear that right?
There was some interest on a messenger reach out from someone at a station, a low power FM station up in Elwood, Pennsylvania. And the little community station up there that's quite big in terms of service, not unlike other locally owned and operated radio properties these days. They really care about their community, and it's very possible that we'll have them on. We've reached out to
hopefully we'll have that announcement before too much longer.
Yeah.
Again, we haven't mentioned our email address in quite a while. If you've got a question or a comment or something you'd like us to address, thefairtaxguys@gmail.com. You can leave us a note. You can leave us a note on our Facebook page. And that is going to wrap up this edition of FAIRtax Power Radio. Again, we are slap out of time. I'm Bob Paxton.
And I'm Bob Scarborough.
We are, as we always say, the FAIRtax Guys, reminding you that the fair tax is the only truly fair tax. And once you understand it,
you'll demand it.
So what do you need from me to get these taxes collected?
Glad you asked, because there is a fair amount of information you need to be aware of.
That's your tax plan?
Oh, no, this is just the revisions for this year's tax plan. What I need from you is you need to keep track of all of your income, as well as any taxes that you've already paid, also any gifts that you received or gifts you've given to churches or charities or individuals throughout the entire year. Do you do any side jobs?
Every now and again.
Great, because there's some more information about that right here. Everything you need to know right here. So just simply compile that, send it in to us. Be careful, make sure there's no mistakes. If we do find mistakes were made, we can fine you or, throw you in jail. So you might want to be aware of that.
And what do you need from me?
As an individual, nothing. As a business owner, or if you're doing side jobs, yes, you would have to collect taxes on that, but, it's all right here.